Thank you. Let me thank Bob for all the work she has done with Iowa CCI. And thank you so much for coming on board the campaign. Let me thank Denise Keller for her work in the trade union movement, and thank Brian McLean also, who is an active member of the trade union movement. Let me thank everybody for coming out tonight and wish everybody a wonderful holiday season and a very happy new year. And in case you got nothing else to do early tomorrow night, we're having a New Year's Eve party in Des Moines. We're having Prince's Band. Who remembers what that band, what's the name of it? Yeah, they're a great band. We heard them in Minneapolis. They are really something else. So if you got nothing else you want to do tomorrow night, come on out and join us in Des Moines. Our campaign, and Bob and others have touched on the theme, is about two things, really. Number one, it is absolutely imperative that we defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about Trump, except to say that regardless of our political views, I am more than aware that not everybody in Iowa agrees with everything that I stand for. But regardless of our political views, I think most of us as parents, grandparents, just don't want a president of the United States who is a pathological liar. I mean, we can deal with the president who we disagree with. There's no president who's going to agree with everything that you believe in. It's called democracy. But you don't want to have somebody who lies every single day, somebody who is a bully, somebody who demeans people, somebody who thrives in chaos. You don't want a president who is not only a liar, but who is a fraud, who told the working people of this country that he would work to provide health care for all, and then he tried to throw 32 million people off the health care that they have. He was a candidate who said, I'm a different type of Republican. I know you heard that here in Iowa. I'm not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And then as president, he proceeded to bring forth massive cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and cuts to the Social Security Disability Fund. This is a president who wages savage attacks against the undocumented in our country, but it turns out he hired undocumented workers in many of his resorts. This is a president who denounces corporations for going abroad, but it turns out as a businessman, he manufactured his products abroad. This is a president who wants to throw hungry people off of food stamps because we cannot afford to provide them nutrition. And yet, when he was a businessman, he received over $800 million in corporate welfare as a real estate developer. So Trump is not just a liar, he is a hypocrite, and he is and will be defeated, and I look forward to doing just that. But this campaign is far more than just defeating Trump. And I think what makes our campaign kind of unique is that I'm here to tell you what I think no other candidate will tell you. And that is that no president, not Bernie Sanders, Bob was referring to this a moment ago, no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. Because I'm going to tell you what you don't see on TV much or hear from Congress. And that is in America today, when you got Wall Street, where a half a dozen banks have assets of over $10 trillion, when you got an insurance industry that makes huge profits by ripping off the American people, when you got a pharmaceutical industry that charges you by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, when you got a fossil fuel industry who lies every single day about the products that they are producing and what that means to climate change, when you got the entire 1% which has enormous wealth. No one president can do it alone. We need millions of people to stand up and fight for justice, and that is what this campaign is about. So that is why what our campaign is about is us, not me. We are in this together because real change in America, whether it is the trade union movement, whether it is the women's movement, whether it is the environmental movement, whether it is the gay rights movement, whether it is the civil rights movement, no real change in America has ever taken place from the top on down. It has always taken place from the bottom on up. That's what this campaign is about. And when we talk about a political transformation, we are raising questions and fighting fights that other campaigns don't do. And we're asking the hard questions. We're asking the question about the degree to which our country today is the leadership of this country is fighting to undermine American democracy. All right? We got Republicans out there who are trying to suppress the vote, who think that they will win by getting support from billionaires and making it harder for poor people or people of color or of young people participating in the political process. Well, my view is diametrically opposite. I want to make it easier for people to vote, not harder for people to vote. And I will tell you something else why I believe we are the strongest campaign to defeat Trump, because we have a very, very strong, unprecedentedly strong grassroots movement. Right now, one of the real crises facing American democracy is the degree to which billionaires are buying elections. You got billionaire families out there that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. Our campaign does not have a super PAC. We don't want a super PAC. Billionaires are not contributing into our campaign. I do not spend my time going to wealthy people's homes and sitting down with a dozen people who are millionaires and billionaires and then leaving with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I am extraordinarily proud to tell you, and this comes from the bottom of my heart, that in terms of fundraising, our campaign has done what no campaign in the history of the United States of America has done up to this moment in a campaign. And I believe that within the next day, by tomorrow, we will have, for this campaign, received 5 million contributions from over 1.3 million Americans, and that average contribution is about $18 a piece. So when we talk about a political revolution, when we talk about having a government that represents all of us and not just the 1% and powerful special interest, raising money from working families rather than billionaires and super PACs is part of that political revolution. And I'm very proud that we are doing right now what has never been done in the history of this country. Now, when we talk about an agenda that works for working families, what are we talking about? All right, let me stop there, and I'm going to ask you a question, all right? We'll start with the questions earlier, and we'll come back later. All right, you're running for president of the United States. What are the issues on your minds? What would you be campaigning on, ma'am? Stand up. I want everybody to hear that. Can we get do we have a mic, Misty?
Thank you. Hi. Nice. Nice to see you again. I'd like to see more done to combat military sexual assault. Last year, 26,500 service members were sexually assaulted. And at the VA, 80% of females and, again, men are sexually assaulted per capita more than women, which is surprising. But 80% of the female veterans reported that they were either sexually harassed or sexually assaulted during their time in the military. It's a disgrace, and we need to work on it.
All right, can we get who's this? Okay, let's see if this can work. Thank you. I'm the former chair of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. I am more than aware of those terrible statistics. My God, we want to stop all forms of sexual assault in this military, but the idea that in this country, but the idea that somebody who goes serves their country, put their lives on the line, has got to worry about not somebody on the other side, but got to worry about people on their own side is unacceptable. And this is an issue we will certainly focus on. All right, what are the other issues that are on people's mind? You're running for president of the United States. What you got? Yep, stand up. Do we have mics here? I guess we do not. Oh. All right, so there we go. See if that works.
The inevitable threat that is climate change that our species is facing. It's
okay.
kind of life or death at this point.
Thank you very much. What's your name? Robert? All right. You know, as all of you know, I campaigned here in Iowa 4 years ago. And during that campaign, I was asked more than once, what I believe to be the major national security threat facing the United States of America. And people often would think that I would respond by saying, well, it is Al-Qaeda, it's another terrorist organization, ISIS, whatever it may be. And what I said, that the greatest national threat facing the United States is climate change. And 4 years ago, people thought I was a little bit crazy. Well, they still do. But they think in terms of climate change, I think there has been, I see it in Iowa, I see it all over this country. People's views have changed. And you know why people's views have changed? Because they're now seeing what climate change is doing with their own eyes. You don't have to read a scientific report. You're seeing it with your own eyes. And let me just say something, Robert. I mean, Robert raised an issue that should get all of us very, very nervous. And that is because what the scientists are telling us is not just that climate change is real. Everybody in the world knows that except Donald Trump. Not just that climate change is caused by human activity. Not just that climate change is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. What the scientists are now telling us is that they underestimated the degree and severity and speed at which climate change is wreaking havoc all over the world. They underestimated the speed in which the polar ice caps are now melting and the ocean is now warming. And what that means will be rising sea levels, which will inundate major cities in America and all over this world. When you talk about the degree of climate change that we are looking at, unless we as a planet get our act together, you're talking about increased global warming to 7 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century, which means more drought, which means more flooding, which means that farmers will have a shorter planting season to grow their crops, which means less crop production and a deterioration in the quality of crops that farmers are producing. It means an increase in illness because bacteria thrive in warm weather, and they will now expand beyond the areas they are currently in. It means more extreme weather disturbances. Some of you may have seen that Venice, Italy, one of the most beautiful cities in the world, was underwater last month. Houston, Texas, experienced unprecedented downfall. So bottom line here, and then on top of all of that, what the United Nations is telling us is that if we don't get our act together, as a result of climate change, where people around the world are unable to find water to drink or land to grow their crops, there will be hundreds of millions of climate refugees. Think about what that means. Hundreds of millions of people on the move, going to other locations, other countries, causing massive international conflict. So, Robert, thank you for raising that question. And let me just be very frank with you. From a moral perspective, we must make sure that our kids and future generations live in a country and in a planet that is healthy and is habitable. That is our moral responsibility as human beings. Now, I have been criticized because I have come up with the most comprehensive and sweeping climate change plan of any candidate to ever run for federal office. I believe that is the case. Okay, and it's an expensive proposition. I acknowledge that. But I want you to think for a second. Help me out on this one if you disagree with me. Tell me what the alternative is if we're going to save this planet for future generations. How much should we not spend? And I don't think there is an answer to that question. I think we have a moral responsibility to save the planet. Goes without saying. I've got 7 grandchildren, beautiful kids, and I want to see them and their kids live in a planet that is healthy. So I am a strong supporter of the concept of the Green New Deal. And what that is about is it tells the fossil fuel industry, coal, oil, gas, etc., that they will no longer have the right to destroy this planet, and that we will transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And in the process, we can create up to 20 million good-paying jobs as we invest heavily in retrofitting our older buildings. Vermont has a lot of older buildings, so do you here in Iowa. Create a whole lot of jobs. We cut people's fuel bills. We transform our transportation system away from fossil fuel, and we invest heavily in wind and solar and other sustainable energies. Iowa is one of the leaders in this country in terms of wind. You're doing a great job. But Iowa and other states, all of us are going to have to do much more. And here's where this issue becomes even more complicated and more difficult, if it's not difficult enough already. And that is, if the United States of America did everything right tomorrow, it would still not solve the problem. Because obviously, climate change is a global issue. So what I am here to tell you, that unlike this president who denies the reality of climate change, I will do my very best to help lead the world, talking to the people of China and India and Pakistan and Russia and Brazil and countries all over the world, making it clear that we have got to go forward together, making it clear that instead of spending $1.8 trillion a year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change. So this is not easy stuff. This is not easy stuff. But the future of the planet is at stake, and it's something we just cannot turn our backs to. Okay, you're running for president. What do you got on your mind? Yes. I don't know if you're old enough to run for president, but anyhow, we'll let that be.
Medicare for all.
Okay.
Healthcare should not be for profit. It should not be reserved for the wealthy. It's health care for the wealthy, health scare for the poor. And we need a system that treats everybody fairly. And every single person, healthcare is a human right. And people should not go under. They should not lose their home. They should not die. Healthcare is a human right. Medicare for all.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to spend a moment on that issue. What's your name, by the way? Amy? I agree with Amy. But I want to spend a moment on that. It's a little complicated issue here. Throughout my entire life, for a variety of reasons, I have believed, as Amy does, that healthcare is a human right. And I believe that all people, regardless of their income, you're poor, he's rich, so what? You're both going to get sick, you're going to both face serious problems, you may have an accident, and it has never seemed right to me that just because you don't have a lot of money, you can't get the access to health care that you need. That's number one. Number two, I want to spend a minute on this, and I need your help. I want you to tell me whether I'm telling you the truth or not. Right now in America, what is the truth? We are spending almost twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country, okay? In other words, if I were to buy a car for $25,000 and you bought a car for $50,000 and my car worked better than your car, something is wrong, right? So we're spending almost twice as much per capita as our Canadian neighbors and friends all over the world, and yet we have, despite that spending, 87 million people who are uninsured or underinsured. I want to underline the word, underinsured. We got 30,000 people a year who die because, as Amy just suggested, these are people who don't get to a doctor when they should because they don't have the insurance. And amazingly enough, and this is a statistic that really does blow me away and talks about the cruelty of the current system. We have some 500,000 Americans last year who went bankrupt because of medically related bills. All right? Now, if you want to gamble away your money and you go bankrupt, it's your business. You want to engage in a risky business enterprise, it's your business. And if you fail, you fail. If you want to, buy a house that you really can't afford and you go bankrupt, that's your problem. But you should not go bankrupt in the United States of America because you're suffering from cancer. That is immoral and that is wrong. And we're going to change that. Now, healthcare is an expensive proposition. That is the way it is, and I'm not going to tell you it's not. So before we talk about Medicare for all, which is what, as some of you may know, I wrote the damn bill. All right. But before we talk about what Medicare for all does, I want to look at the current system. Because I have been criticized. People say, well, Bernie, how are you going to pay for it? That's a fair question. And I'm going to tell you in a minute how I pay for it. Before I tell you how I am going to pay for it, I want my opponents, whether it is Trump in the Republican Party, whether it is the healthcare industry, whether it is the Democratic establishment, I want them to explain how we are paying for it right now. And I want you to help me explain it to them. Okay? Let's talk for a moment about premiums. All right? Anybody here paying premiums? Yes, you're paying premiums. All right. All right? Anyone want to tell me how much you're paying in premiums? A month? All right. He is paying and $1,400 a month. That's about $16,000 a year. You got any deductibles or co-payments? Or is that? And on top of that, you got deductibles and co-payments. That's how you're paying for healthcare. I assume you're not a billionaire. You wouldn't be at this meeting, I think. Okay. Kind of a middle-class guy? Yeah, okay, all right. $16,000 is a lot of money to pay for health care. It's a large percentage of his income. All right, anybody else want to tell us what they're paying for premiums? Yes, ma'am. $1,100 a month, which is $13,000 a year. Do you have any deductibles? Got a deductible. And you're also another billionaire in the room, right? You wish, okay. All right, that's how we're paying for it. Anybody else want to talk about premiums? Yeah. Jesus, God. I mean, that's a lot of money. Plus $6,000 out of pocket. All right, see, these are the points. You're paying $1,500 a month, That's $18,000 a year, plus how much out of pocket? It's $24,000 a year. That's how he's paying for health care, okay? All right, that's premiums. Now I want to talk about something else, which we don't talk about. And I appreciate so much people volunteering that information, because everybody in America is roughly in the same place. That's how you're paying for it. Now, you can call the premium a tax for the insurance companies, or whatever you want, but it's money coming out of your own pocket, okay? Now, that's premiums. Let's talk about another phenomenon of American healthcare, and that is the so-called deductible. Now, what our campaign is about is trying to think outside of the box. Take a look at what goes on and say, whoa, does that really make sense? You would think on the surface that if you had insurance, you pay for insurance. Okay, I pay for insurance, maybe I'm paying too much, but I go to the doctor when I get sick, right? That is what you would assume. And yet, if you got a deductible before you can go into the doctor, you got to come up with thousands and thousands of dollars out of your own pocket. Think for a second. What happens if you are a working class person and you don't have the hundreds of dollars you may need to get the tests or go to the doctor? What happens? You don't go to the doctors, or you have to borrow money and go more deeply into debt. Okay? Who wants to talk about deductibles here? What kind of deductibles are people in Iowa looking at? How much? 8,000? 8,100? All right. So what she's saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, that before insurance kicks in, you have to take out $8,100 out of your own pocket. That's how that's before insurance. I didn't ask you your premium, right? You're also paying a premium. $1,400. Gee, God. You're paying high medical costs here in Iowa. Did anyone tell you that? You're from Missouri. You're paying a high price. I know that. Missouri has their own. All right? All right, deductibles. What else you got? Anyone else want to talk about deductibles? Any hands about deductibles? Yes, sir.
We have a $10,000 family deductible.
All right. You're paying $10,000 out of your own pocket before insurance kicks in?
For hospital.
For hospital, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else on deductibles? Okay, yes, sir.
A $6,000 deductible, and we just found out a couple weeks ago the same policy is going up to $13,500 next year. And we have $1,100 premium a month.
So the next time, thank you. The next time that you see on television somebody saying, hey, Bernie Sanders, how are you going to pay for Medicare for all? Remember what these folks here are saying tonight. And this is how tens of millions of people, workers and employers, are paying for their health care. They're paying outrageously high prices. And here is just a broad national, so you have humanized it by giving us some personal examples. But what the statistics are is the median family income in America, that family in the middle of the American economy, makes about $60,000 a year. That family is paying $12,000 a year for health insurance, 20% of their income. That, my friends, is an outrage, okay? So, now, what is Medicare for all? Now, that's how we're paying for it. We're paying for it. I was in New Hampshire the other day doing exactly this, and some guy shows up, Bernie, you want to know how we're paying for it? I don't have any health insurance, and I'm scared to death that I'm going to get sick. Sir, yeah. Is that your situation? Yeah. That's how we're paying for it, that people are scared to death that they may get sick. And if they go to the hospital, what's going to happen? You're going to go bankrupt, yes? You can't pay off the bill. That's how we're paying for it today, in a grossly unfair, regressive, and outrageous way. So let me talk about Medicare for all. Amy asked the question. Am I going to sit here and tell you, I'm not sitting, you're sitting, I'm standing. Am I going to stand here and tell you that it's for free, that it doesn't cost anything? That would be untrue. Of course, healthcare costs money. So instead of paying for it with outrageous premiums and deductibles and co-payments and out-of-pocket expenses, we're going to pay for health care in a different, more rational and fairer way. Okay, for a start, what are you getting under Medicare for all? What kind of health care are you getting? You're going to get comprehensive health care. Now, Medicare today, anybody here on Medicare? Okay, you know two things. You know you got to be 65 to get into it, with certain exceptions. And number two, Medicare, while a strong program, does not cover, in fact, many health care needs. It doesn't cover dental care, which is a huge issue for people, and particularly seniors. Doesn't cover hearing aids, doesn't cover eyeglasses. And you know what else it doesn't cover? Home health care. The Medicare for All legislation that I wrote covers all of that. Because last that I heard that oral health and hearing and eyes, that's health care. And I don't know how you not cover it. So we expand Medicare to cover all of those health care needs. Okay? Then what we do is we have a 4-year transition period. And that is right now, eligibility for Medicare is 65. We lower it first year to 55. That means everybody above 55 will be in Medicare. Number two, we then lower it to 45. We lower it the next year to 35. And the fourth year, everybody is in. Okay? So remember, covers everybody, comprehensive health care, whether you're employed, whether you're unemployed, whether you're a school teacher, whether you're sleeping out on the streets, whatever you may be, you have health care, comprehensive health care. Without premiums, without co-payments, without deductibles, without out-of-pocket expenses. Okay, that's good. Everyone's saying, that's good. Now, how are you going to pay for that? All right, let's deal with that, because we have to pay for it. Well, we pay for it through a number of different options, but I want to talk about one that is most relevant to working families all over this country. This is what we say. We are going to raise your taxes by 4% on your income with a $29,000 tax exemption. What does that mean? It means if you're that average family who makes $60,000 a year, your $29,000 are exempted. You are paying 4% of $31,000, which is a little over $1,200 a year for comprehensive health care. How's that? Okay, and we fund it. We eliminate premiums for employers as well, and there will be a payroll tax that will save the overwhelming majority of employers substantial sums of money. Now, how can we do this? Are we pulling these numbers out of the sky? We're not. Right now, you are living with the most wasteful, complicated, and Byzantine healthcare system in the world. All right? I was just reading something today where a lawyer, a guy who was a lawyer, his wife, I think, was a PhD, trying to figure out Part D Medicare, for example. I mean, it takes, it's very complicated dealing with insurance. So how do we save money? We save money because last year, the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry combined made $100 billion in profit. This president will take on the greed and corruption of the pharmaceutical industry. We will very substantially lower prescription drug prices in America. And the pharmaceutical industry is not just greedy. That they are notorious for. They are corrupt. They engage in price fixing. Anyone knows anything about the opioid epidemic? They were selling a product that they knew was addicting people and killing people, and they were making money off of that. We are going to take them on and very substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs. Some of you may know that a number of months ago, I went to Canada, took a group of people from the Midwest into Canada to buy insulin. Anybody here diabetic using insulin? Yeah, we got a gentleman over there. The cost that we found in Canada for the same exact product made by the same exact company was 1/10 the price of what people in the United States were paying. 1/10 the price, which speaks to the political corruption in America. You know why they charge any price they want? Because there is no law to stop them. And you know why there's no law to stop them? Because over the last 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has spent $4 billion in lobbying and campaign contributions. Go to the website, open source. Find out where the pharmaceutical industry spreads their money. It's all over the place. It's Republicans, it's Democrats. And then the result of all that, they could double or triple the price of the medicine you get tomorrow, and nothing stops them. Together, we will stop them. That I can assure you. And the other thing, the other way we waste money by the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars is in America, we have thousands of separate insurance plans. Okay? You got a $5,000 deductible, you got a $10,000. You're in this network, you're in that network. You have your prescription drugs covered this way, you have them covered another way. You're paying this premium, you're paying that premium. Thousands of separate plans. And it costs many, many, many hundreds of billions of dollars to administer that enormously complicated system. We create a simple plan. We expand upon Medicare. It is a simple plan which guarantees health care to all people. You go to any doctor you want. You go to any hospital you want. Take out your card, and that is it. You don't have to take out your wallet. You don't have to take out your credit card. Everybody is in it. Okay? This is not a radical idea that I invented in the middle of the night. This is an idea that more or less exists all over the world. You go up to Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. You have a serious health issue. You're in the hospital for a month. Do you know how much you pay when you get out? Anyone know? Pay nothing. Pay zero. Quality care is good or better as it is in the United States because it is publicly funded. You go to any doctor you want, you don't take out your credit card. Now, the beauty of that is you save hundreds of billions of dollars in administrative costs. When you fill out all of these forms and you spend half your life arguing with the insurance company about whether or not you're going to get covered for what you thought you paid for, you're wasting your time, and the guy at the other end of the phone, you're paying for him to tell you that you're not getting the coverage that you thought you were. So you have a simple system. Again, this is not a Bernie Sanders idea. This exists in one form or another. They're all a little bit different. Each country has a different system. But basically, they're simple systems. This system, to be frank, is designed not to provide quality care for all people, but it is designed to make huge profits for the drug companies and for the insurance companies. So while so many of our people are uninsured or underinsured, while thousands die each year, while 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford the prescription drugs their doctors prescribe, while all of that is going on, drug companies, insurance companies made $100 billion in profits last year. And then what they do with their money is they put advertising here on television here in Iowa. Because when you make $100 billion, you can afford to do a lot of advertising. You can afford to buy a lot of politicians. And that is what's going on. Now, the truth is, what I've been talking about tonight has been talked about in this country for over 100 years. I didn't invent this idea. Teddy Roosevelt talked about it in the early part of the 20th century. FDR talked about it in the 30s and 40s. Truman talked about it. JFK talked about it. Lyndon Johnson talked about it and did something about it, actually. Jimmy Carter talked about it. Obama talked about it. Nixon even talked about it. I think that after 100 years of talk, maybe it's time we ended the talk and finally do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care to all people as a human right. All right, I went on for too long about it, but that is just an issue that the more I study and talk to people, and I go all over the country and I have these meetings, and it breaks your heart We had a meeting in Des Moines a couple of months ago talking about what happens to people when they can't afford to pay their health care bills, how they're hounded by bill collectors, how their credit scores deteriorate. It's a pathetic situation, and it's time that we change it. All right, let me get some questions from people who haven't asked the first question, sir.
See, on September 17th, the repo rate, the overnight Fed rate, went from 2% to 10%. And then on May 12th, the New York Fed said that they were going to put $2.93 trillion into Wall Street. They guaranteed those funds for Wall Street. And those are indicators of another financial collapse. And if that happens before Trump's elected, then the Republicans will claim that, it's because that Wall Street was afraid that a Democrat was going to be elected. But if a Democrat's elected, then we're going to have the same thing as what happened to Obama.
Well, what happened to Bush
I think we need to go on the offensive.
Yeah,
but yet this
that's
hasn't
good.
Been,
Okay.
This hasn't been brought to the attention
Let
of
me
the public.
just say this. Thanks for making that point. We could spend all night here talking about issues, but one of the issues that we don't talk enough about is the power of Wall Street and the impact that Wall Street has on our economy. I was one of those members of Congress who voted against the bailout of the crooks on Wall Street 11 years ago. Not everybody did, including some folks who I am running against in this Democratic primary. But I thought that to bail out people who acted not only recklessly, but illegally, they were selling fraudulent products. That's what they were doing. So I voted against that. But where we are today, some of you will be shocked to know that after we bailed out the major banks because they were too big to fail, many of them are now larger than they were before we bailed them out. Okay? So I think that it is absolutely imperative, in order to prevent what you are talking about, another crash, it is important to understand that 6 banks in this country have financial assets equivalent to 50% of the GDP of America, over $10 trillion. You got that? 6 banks control $10 trillion in assets. And I believe that if a bank is too big to fail, it is too big to exist. We're going to break up these large banks. Okay, other issues? Yes, ma'am. Reinstate the fairness doctrine. It's something that we should be thinking about a whole lot. You're raising a whole question about media in America. I think, that as Trump tries to undermine democracy, he does something that demagogues always do. And he tells you everything on television and the radio and the news, fake news. And that's disgusting, frankly. Because the goal of that is that anytime anybody criticizes him, don't believe it. It's all fake news. They're all fake. So I think what Trump is doing is trying to undermine faith in a free press in America, which is a disgraceful thing to do. But what I do worry about is I worry about concentration of ownership in the media and who owns the media. And I think that is an objective and fair question to ask. Yeah, and the answer is that you have a relatively small number of large media conglomerates who determine what the American people see, hear, and read. And I think that is an issue that we're going to have to tackle. I believe in the free press. I believe in First Amendment, absolutely. But I also think it's important that we have far more diversity in the media than we have right now. Okay, I see a question right here, sir.
2 years ago, the biodiesel tax credit lapsed. Something very important here in rural Iowa. Would you commit to a multi-year biodiesel tax credit so that companies trying to work towards fixing the climate can actually
Yes,
plan ahead of time?
I would. Look, when we're talking, I know how important biofuels are here to Iowa, including wind and other things you're trying to do. If we are serious about breaking our dependency on fossil fuels, we want to use all of the sustainable type energies that we can. We need more research to increase the efficiency of biofuels, correct? Oh, yes, absolutely. So the answer is yes. Okay, way in the back, I see a woman with a red scarf.
I'm concerned about the deep divisions in Washington where issues that seem to enjoy bipartisan support, things like background checks on gun purchases and even universal pre-K, just often fizzle out or die on the Senate floor. How would a Sanders administration navigate this landscape any differently from previous administrations?
Good question. Thank you very much. Look, I think all of us are deeply disturbed about the level of divisiveness in this country. And then on top of the divisiveness led by Trump is the kind of just unbelievably harsh attacks. You know, it's a democracy, so you disagree with me, so what? Doesn't make you a terrible person, doesn't make me a terrible person. We disagree. We look at the world a little differently. But I think right now I am very worried about the level of hatred that we're seeing, and you're seeing that manifested in hate crimes. And then I am worried about the political divisions that we see as a nation. So let me tell you what I would do and how I would approach that issue. I happen to believe that if you look at the issues facing the working families of this country, you find that there is a lot less divisiveness than might appear in the surface or that the media might portray. All right? So I go all over the country and I ask people, all right, should we raise the minimum wage in this country to a living wage? And you know what people say, Republicans and Democrats? Yes, we should. Very few people I talk to think that a $7.25 minimum wage, which is what you have here in Iowa, makes any sense at all. So you bring people together around issues. Should women earn equal pay for equal work? Almost everybody in America says, of course, they should. Should we make it easier for the millions of workers who want to join unions to be able to do so? The American people say yes. Is health care a human right? Most Americans, not all, say yes. Should we make college education available to all people, regardless of their income? The American people say yes. Is climate change a major threat to our planet? Every day, more and more people understand that Trump's view is absurd, that this is a crisis, and that we have to act on it. Same thing with immigration reform and criminal justice reform. Same thing as you indicated with gun policy. That's a good example of it. All right? Everybody in America is appalled, is heartbroken by the kind of gun violence that we see. Okay? I talk to people all of the time whose children are scared about going to school because they worry what could happen. I talked to a woman in New Hampshire. I mean, just think about this. She says, Bernie, what am I supposed to tell my daughter, who is 11 years of age, who wants a bulletproof backpack? All right. This is what kids are thinking about. Now, your point is that the American people want action on it. Are there differences of opinion? There are. But by and large, there is a very broad consensus among gun owners and not gun owners, among rural states like Vermont and Iowa, and urban areas like Chicago and Los Angeles. What do people want? What are they prepared to support? They support expanded universal background checks. They support ending the gun show loophole. They support ending the so-called straw man provision, which allows you to legally buy guns at a gun store and then go out and sell it to criminals. And increasingly, by the way, a majority of the American people now believe that we should ban something I believe for a very long time, ban the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. Okay? Now, your question is, if the vast majority of the American people agree with all of those principles and more, Why doesn't it happen? Why doesn't Congress do what the American people want? And the answer is very simple, and I don't mean to be overly political here, overly partisan, but I think everybody knows the answer. The answer is that Trump and the Republican Party are intimidated by the NRA. That's about it. I wish I could give you a more complicated and detailed answer. That is the answer. They would rather listen to the NRA rather than to the overwhelming majority of the American people. So let me just say, to answer your question, this president will not be intimidated by the NRA. We'll have gun policy, which is what the American people want. Okay, a few more questions. Okay, I see a woman back there.
I am lucky to have a good education system for my 2 boys, but what about, the thousands of kids who don't have access to a good public education?
Good. What our campaign tries to do, and I know sometimes we may not be successful at getting it across, we are trying to ask people to think outside of the box, not just to look at the options that Congress gives you, or look at the choices that come across the TV screens or the newspapers. So you raised the simple question about education. There's nobody in this room, or very few people in America, who does not understand how important education is to all of us as human beings and to our country in a highly competitive global economy. With some exceptions, increasingly, to make it into the middle class, you're going to need a higher education. Maybe it's college, maybe it's a trade school where you learn how to do a particular craft that can make you a good living. Everybody knows that. There's no argument. And then on top of that, everybody knows what the psychologists tell us, that the most important years of human development, intellectually and emotionally, are 0 through 4. All right, everybody knows this. And yet our priorities as a nation ignore those important realities. So for the littlest kids, you got mom going out to work, you got dad going out to work, and in Iowa and in Vermont and all over this country, it is almost impossible to find good quality, affordable childcare. Am I right about that or not? All right. And every study ever done says the best investment that the country can make, invest in the little children. At their earliest ages, they will do better in school, they won't drop out, they'll become productive members of society. We don't do that. Now you asked the question, okay? You got families all over this country. And by the way, in the midst of this great booming economy, please understand that for the average worker in America, real inflation accounted for wages last year went up by 1.1%. Wow, how lucky are we? 1.1%. So you got a lot of families out there struggling with the cost of education. What do we do about it? Iowa, it turns out, my history is correct here, was one of the leaders in public education in America. Okay? And 100+ years ago, very brave people said something. They said, you know what, all kids, not just the rich, should be able to get a good quality education. Therefore, we'll develop public schools, and kids, regardless of their income, will be able to go to school from first grade through high school. Pretty revolutionary act. That was well over 100 years ago. You know what? We got to rethink that now. So when we talk about free public education, we have got to be talking about making our public colleges and universities tuition free. Not a radical idea. Exists in many countries around the world. And by the way, it used to exist 50 years ago, pretty much in the United States of America. Great universities, like the University of California, City University of New York, were virtually tuition free. And the other thing that we have to do when we think outside of the box and we think about a government that represents working families and not just the billionaire class, is if we could bail out the crooks on Wall Street, if 2 years ago Trump and his friends could give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% in large profitable corporations, you know what we can do? we can impose a modest tax on Wall Street speculation and cancel all student debt in America. Okay, let me take one or two more questions. Sir, right here. Yeah. Oh, he's looking at the paper. I'm getting nervous here. It's a 12-point question. All right.
How would the Sanders administration...
Take the mic.
How will the Sanders administration handle soft diplomatic programs? This administration seems to be scoring an F. This is Peace Corps, ACDI VOCA, programs that help the poor people in the third world help themselves.
Okay. Good question. Thank you. We don't spend enough, so many issues out there that, we just almost don't have the time to spend that at all, but we don't spend enough time talking about foreign policy and all that stuff. Look, this is what I believe. It's what I believe my whole life. War should be the last response to international conflict. All right? The last response. And what that means, we have to do exactly the opposite of what Trump is doing. What Trump is doing is greatly expanding military spending. And I got to tell you that we are now spending more than the next 10 nations combined. And I'm also proud to tell you that I have voted against all of Trump's defense budgets. Yes. But at the same time, he is cutting back on our diplomatic corps and on the needs of the State Department. I've been all over the world talking to leaders of countries all over the world. And by the way, many of those trips went with your former Senator, Tom Harkin. Tom and I went all over the world together. And what you find is in the diplomatic corps and embassies all over the world, you would be really proud. These people speak the local language. They know the culture. They're doing their best to represent the United States of America and trying to do what they can to prevent wars, to try to make people all over the world respect what we stand for and what our values are. So to answer your question, in Bernie Sanders, you will have a president not as one like Trump who coddles dictators and authoritarians all over the world, but one who holds up as a beacon our views and our belief in democracy and human rights. And that means we will greatly expand our diplomatic efforts and do everything we can to try to create a peaceful world and not a world of conflict. All right, maybe one last question. Okay, got it. Right here.
I believe we need to address the incentive for large business owners and shareholders to minimize the expense of wages used to support families by calling excess labor productivity profit instead of keeping it for yourself as a worker. This causes a whole host of issues we see today. They're giving massive sums of money and undemocratic power to billionaires.
Okay, well, to answer your question, I probably have the strongest pro-worker and pro-union voting record of any member of the United States Congress. That's what I do. I walked on picket lines, and in order to give workers more power, we have introduced a workforce, what we call the Workforce Democracy Act, which would make it much easier for workers to join unions. I believe that we have got to learn from other countries. And if you're a large corporation, you can't just have Wall Street guys sitting on the board of directors. You have to have workers on that board of directors as well. So those are concepts that I believe in. We got to democratize the American economy, and that's something we will do. We want to give people more control over their lives and not just see people cogs in a machine. All right. See, when you give a million speeches, it does something to your voice. So I apologize for that. All right, let me conclude by just saying this. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And just to say that as a United States Senator, I am very aware of the powers of Wall Street, the power of Wall Street, the insurance companies, the drug companies, the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel industries. These guys have a whole lot of power. And the 1% has endless amounts of money. People don't appreciate what endless amounts of money. Money doesn't mean anything to them. Spend $1 million here, $1 billion there, it doesn't matter because you got all kinds of money. At the end of the day, they are very powerful, but I'll tell you what I believe in my heart, is that if we do not allow Trump to divide us up by the color of our skin, where we were born, our religion, our sexual orientation, if we stand together around an agenda, and I've talked a little bit about that agenda tonight, an agenda that works for all of us, not just the 1%, we can not only defeat Donald Trump, but we can bring transformative change to this country. And that is what this campaign is about. Thank you all very much.